The deepest places on Earth are quiet. Not peaceful, not empty, just quiet in a way that feels deliberate. When ships pass over them, their instruments behave oddly. When divers approach, they speak more softly without knowing why. And when the Navy began mapping one of these places, the Emden Trench in the Philippine Sea, they expected the usual silence of the deep. Instead, they found small changes: a drifting compass, a single pulse on sonar, a silt pattern that made no geological sense. Each anomaly seemed isolated, harmless, easy to ignore. But over the years, the patterns deepened. Shapes appeared where no rock should form. Layers revealed themselves inside the sediment. And something beneath the seafloor began to move slowly, purposefully, as if following a schedule older than any chart. What the Navy divers discovered there should not exist, yet it does. And the deeper you look, the less the silence feels natural. The shape beneath the silence. The ocean around the Philippine Sea often looks calm from above. The surface shows only small lines of wind, but below it lies one of the deepest places on Earth. Navy divers from the USS Harper's Run learned this on the 14th of May in 1987, when they were sent to investigate an object resting near the upper rim of the Emden Trench. The request came from the Pacific Underwater Survey Office, which had received a sonar return that did not match any known pattern. It was not a rock, it was not a broken vessel. It had a clean outline, too smooth for nature. The report handed to Lieutenant Mark Hale simply said, "Geometric anomaly detected. Depth 2,940 meters. Possible hazard." The divers prepared in the early morning. The ship rocked in slow rhythm as Hale briefed the team. The plan was simple. They would descend in the Mark 6th atmospheric suits, reach the set coordinate, and check for debris that might interfere with local shipping routes. But Hale added one detail that stayed in every log afterward. He said the object had a shape like a long oval, measured at 41 meters across, and gave a faint metallic echo when the sonar pinged it twice. The tone in his voice was flat, but the divers noticed he did not repeat the word metallic. He simply nodded and moved on. The descent lasted longer than usual. The Mark 6 suits moved slowly, dropping through blue, then dark blue, then a quiet black space where only the helmet lights cut through the water. Diver Andrea Lowell kept her mic open, calling out depth markers every 50 meters. At 1,900 meters, she said the temperature dropped faster than predicted. At 2,300 meters, diver Russ Jennings said something odd was happening to the compass. Its needle drifted for 3 seconds before settling back. They checked all instruments and continued downward. By 2,850 meters, the lights caught the seafloor. It stretched flat and wide, like a desert covered in fine dust. Nothing moved, no currents stirred. Jennings described it as a field of sleep. The divers advanced in a slow line until Lowell stopped mid-step. She said she saw a reflection, but she was not sure why there would be one. Hale told them to proceed carefully. The object came into view with no warning. It lay half buried in silt, tilted slightly toward the trench. The divers stood still as their lights passed over its surface. It did not look like any craft they had trained to identify. The surface was smooth, pale grey, and free of cracks or rust marks. Jennings touched it with a glove and said, "Feels warm." The reading confirmed it. The surface temperature was several degrees higher than the water around it. Hale asked for confirmation twice, then instructed them to record the measurement again from another point. The same result appeared. Lowell walked along the object's curve. She counted her steps aloud, 22 steps along the visible section. A faint line ran across the top, forming a pattern almost like an arc. When she leaned closer, she noticed the line was not carved. It seemed pressed into the material from within, as if something beneath had shaped it. Hale told her to stop examining and return to the main position. But before she stepped back, her suit's audio picked up a soft vibration. It lasted less than a second. No one else heard it. She repeated her report calmly. A low hum, not mechanical, more like pressure against the suit. The team recorded samples of sediment near the site. The grains stuck lightly to the object, then slid away, as if repelled by something unseen. Their instruments did not detect any electric charge, yet every attempt to leave a mark failed. Hale struck it with the specimen bar, but the impact made no sound through the suit. The bar simply bounced off without leaving a scratch. Jennings said quietly, "It's like it absorbs the hit." Hale finally ordered a full perimeter scan. As they circled it, the trench beside them dropped into darkness, without any edge visible. Lowell said she felt a steady pull toward the deeper side, though her suit showed no change in current. The others agreed they felt heavier. The pressure remained normal. The pull faded each time they stepped away from the trench line. At 10:42 a.m., the team detected a thin opening near the object's base. It was small, maybe 10 centimeters wide, shaped almost like a slit. Lowell tried shining her light inside. The beam vanished instantly, swallowed by the darkness. Not blocked, absorbed. Hale told her to step back, but before she did, the opening widened slightly. Jennings shouted for her to move. All suits registered a pressure shift. Not an increase, more like a vacuum pulling outward, then releasing again. The slit closed as fast as it had opened. Moments later, the seafloor trembled, a short, gentle shake. Not an earthquake, more like a single pulse. Their lights flickered. The object did not move, but silt lifted around it in a slow spiral before settling again. The pulse repeat never came. The water returned to stillness. Hale called for ascent. The divers turned away from the site as their cameras continued recording the shape. Jennings remarked that the compass needle was drifting again, but only when they faced the object. When turned away, the needle stabilized. Lowell checked her depth gauge twice. It read the correct number, then jumped by 80 meters, then corrected itself. Hale remained calm. He kept them focused on the ascent pattern. The return to the surface took longer than planned. When they reached the platform, the crew noted ice forming around the joints of the suits, even though the water at that level was not cold enough for it. Jennings' visor also had a thin fog pattern on the inside, shaped in a circular ring. He tried wiping it, but the ring remained until the suit fully warmed. Debriefing started at 3:20 p.m. Hale handed the camera footage to the ship's chief analyst, but when they reviewed it, most frames were washed in static, each time the light passed over the curved line on the object. Only the readings remained clear: a warm surface, the slit opening, the pressure change, and the compass drift. The footage showing the surface texture failed to record. The crew saved all logs and sent them by secure line to the Pacific Underwater Survey Office. No reply came for 2 days. On the third day, a marked crate arrived by helicopter. Inside were sealed envelopes, one for Hale, one for the ship captain, and one marked technical. Hale read his privately. He never revealed the contents, but the only sentence he repeated to Lowell later was, "They want us to stand by for further instructions." Those instructions never came. The tides that moved without wind. The ocean above the Emden Trench looked ordinary to anyone passing over it on the 2nd of June 1987. The sky held thin clouds that made slow shapes. The surface rolled in small waves. Nothing suggested that the water below had changed after the Navy dive team's encounter. But the logs kept by the weather station on Itbayat Island show small notes entered by technician Raul Cardenas starting at 4:18 a.m. His handwriting was calm, but the words recorded something unusual. Currents shifting without wind. No storm, no pressure system. He marked it again at 5:2 a. Surface rings forming, perfect circles, lasted 20 seconds. Cardenas saw the rings without a telescope. They were large enough to appear as faint silver patterns spreading across the distant surface. He assumed they were caused by a passing vessel, but no ship appeared on radar. The Philippine Coast Guard vessel BRP Cabra logged the same rings at 6:11 a.m. Southbound crew member Ed Ponce wrote that the circles spread like breath across a mirror and then vanished. He also noted the water rose slightly before settling again. Not a wave, a lift, smooth and uniform. Satellite images from the NOAA 9 weathercraft captured the first clear record of the disturbance at 7:40 a.m. The image later archived under file code P919870602 shows a faint spiral in the water. It did not rotate, it did not drift. It simply held its shape for 8 minutes, then collapsed as the satellite passed over. Analysts said the pattern did not match any known sea vortex or current. No winds were recorded in the area strong enough to have shaped the formation. At 9 a.m, fishermen from the town of Basco reported their nets drifting sideways instead of downward. One of them, Noel Ramirez, later told a maritime researcher that the nets hung like they were caught in a slow pull from below. His boat, the Santa Elena, moved several meters even though the engine was off and the water appeared still. Ramirez anchored twice. Each time, The rope stretched and trembled as if tugged by something deep. He returned to shore early and told the harbour office he would not fish near the trench until the water stopped acting strange. Is very 15. The USS Harper's Run, still stationed 70 kilometers from the site, recorded mild deck vibrations during routine operations. The cause was unclear. All engines were idling. By noon, the scientific instruments on board detected a temperature shift, a gradual rise of 1 degree in a ring-shaped formation. The pattern expanded outward in a slow curve, matching the measurements seen on NOAA 9. Lieutenant Mark Hale requested permission to send an unmanned submersible to check the area. The reply came from the Pacific Underwater Survey Office at 12:43 p.m. It stated, "Hold position, no further deployments authorized." The message ended there. The temperature rise continued throughout the afternoon. By 15:10 p.m., sensors marked a precise boundary where warm water met cold water. The line formed a circle with a diameter noted at 2 kilometers. The circle did not move with the tide. It did not shift. Hale described it in his log as a fixed border drawn in the sea. He asked the crew physicist to run salinity tests. They revealed no change. The water tasted normal. It only felt slightly warmer inside the ring. That evening, the Cabra recorded an event at 18:57 p.m. Crew member Ponce wrote that the surface around the vessel rose by several inches, spread outward, and then flattened. No waves followed. The rise felt like an exhale from the deep. His captain logged the same event and added a note that no undersea quake had been recorded across the entire region. Seismic stations remained silent. On the Harper's Run, the sonar team detected a low-frequency vibration at 21:12 p.m. It was not a steady tone, more like a single pulse, spaced 3 minutes apart. The pulse travelled outward and faded quickly. Hale compared it to the pressure shift the divers felt near the slit on the object. He wrote in his personal notes that the timing between pulses increased by about 5 seconds each cycle, but after 13 pulses, the signal stopped. By midnight, the unusual current stopped as well. The circles did not reappear. The water returned to normal. The crew slept without further alarms. But the files kept in the ship's restricted locker show one more entry written at 1:07 a.m. It came from sonar technician Daniel Ortiz, who had remained awake reviewing the data. He wrote, "One faint return at the trench edge, stationary, not rock, same smooth outline as earlier scans, but the object's position seems different by 7 meters. Could be error. We'll recheck at 0600. Ortiz reviewed the numbers again in the morning. The return remained the same. The object appeared to have shifted slightly toward the deeper section of the trench. The coordinates were forwarded to the Pacific Underwater Survey Office. No reply came. On June 3, an unmarked aircraft passed over the ship at 9:22 a.m. Hale reported the plane had no visible insignia and flew lower than commercial craft. It circled once, then left. 30 minutes later, a message arrived from the office instructing the ship to move 40 kilometers east and stay on standby. The message included a line Hale underlined in his log: "Cease all active sonar immediately." The movement of the ship did not stop the readings. Even at the new location, the sensors picked up mild fluctuations in the water temperature for the next 2 days. Each fluctuation lasted less than 15 seconds. The crew grew used to the instrument alarms. They logged the changes with the same calm tone as before. On June 6, everything stopped. The water around the trench showed no unusual activity. The normal patterns returned, but the fishermen from Basco kept their distance. They said the sea felt heavier. They said the nets came back coated in fine sediment that did not belong near the surface. Ramirez described it as dust from someplace far below. 3 weeks later, the NOAA released a public report listing the disturbances as unexplained thermal shifts. The report gave no mention of the shape beneath the trench, the slit that opened and closed, or the sonar pulses. It only referred to the events as surface anomalies, consistent with minor hydrothermal activity, though no vents had ever been recorded in that region. The Harper's Run received orders to return to Pearl Harbor on June 28. Hale filed his final note before departure. It read, "There are currents here that do not follow the wind, and something below that does not want to remain buried." The ship left quietly. The trench remained still. The recordings that erased themselves. The first signs appeared on the 12th of July 1987, when Lieutenant Mark Hale attempted to review the dive footage stored in the secure archive at Pearl Harbor. The recordings were kept on standard magnetic tape, sealed in temperature-controlled cases. Hale expected to find the same images he had seen during the initial review aboard the USS Harper's Run. Instead, he found long stretches of distorted frames. The faces of the divers flickered in and out. The lights on their suits shivered into static. The outline of the object beneath the Emden Trench shifted into thin, broken lines. What had been clean and sharp now looked as if something had brushed across the tape. He called technician Nora Evans to inspect the malfunction. Evans examined the reels under magnification and found no physical damage. The tape had not been stretched, warped, or exposed to heat. She replayed the file from the start and paused at the 20-minute mark. The timestamp was missing. It had been replaced by a blank black bar. Evans checked again. The original numbers from the dive log showed a time of 10 hours, 14 minutes, and 8 seconds. The tape displayed nothing. On July 14, Hale brought the audio logs for analysis. These had been recorded separately through each diver's suit. Russ Jennings's microphone track should have captured every word of his step count and instrument callouts. Instead, whole segments had gone silent. His voice was replaced by a low rumble, not static, something smoother. Technician Evans described it as a tone without a note. She tried isolating the frequency, but every filter she applied distorted it further. The tone vanished when she attempted to amplify it. The logs from diver Andrea Lowell showed a different problem. Her audio had sections where her voice echoed, as if she were speaking in an empty room. The sound bounced, even though she was underwater. Evans played one clip repeatedly. Lowell said, "Depth 2850, and her voice rose in 3 faint delayed copies. The copies did not match the pitch of her original voice. Evans wrote in her report that the echoes had mechanical closeness, but no identifiable origin. By July 22, the visual distortion worsened. The frames showing the slit in the object blurred completely. The shape became a smear of light. Evans projected the image on the wall. The smear looked stretched, almost as if the image had been pulled sideways by an unseen pressure. She checked the original reference copy stored on board the Harper's Run. That copy had also degraded. The smear appeared in the exact same place on both tapes. Not random, not accidental. On August 1, Hale held a meeting with the Naval Data Preservation Unit. They tested the tapes for magnetic interference. None was found. They checked for salt exposure. None. They scanned for thermal contamination. The readings were stable. The head archivist, Commander Ronald Wyatt, suggested the tapes might have been damaged during transport. But Hale pointed out something odd. The corrupted areas did not drift or spread. Each corrupted section stayed in a fixed shape, as if something had erased the information in a precise rectangle. Evans confirmed this. She said, "It's as if the missing pieces were removed cleanly, without touching the surrounding frames." On August 10, Hale reviewed a backup copy that had been stored in a separate facility at Hickam Air Force Base. He believed this set would be untouched. When he loaded the tape, the first 30 seconds played normally. Then, at the moment Jennings touched the object on the seafloor, the tape cut to black. Not noise, not distortion, a perfect, unbroken black frame that lasted 3 minutes before the footage resumed. Hale asked for the archival logs on when the backup copies were last opened. The records showed no access since the day they arrived. No one had touched them. No one had performed any test playback. Yet the timestamps on the black section matched the missing segment in the original copy. Hale wrote in his notebook, "Something in the footage removes itself." On August 19, Evans brought him a new concern. She discovered that each time she played the tapes, the degradation increased. Shapes that had been visible days earlier faded into haze. The numbers on the diver's depth gauges blurred. In some frames, Hale's own voice on the surface feed slowed, stretching by fractions of a second. Evans compared the waveform to earlier captures. "It was changing on its own," she said. "It's like the tape is decaying only where the trench object appears." By September 2, the Navy ordered the investigation transferred to a higher clearance division. Hale and Evans signed over all remaining copies. But Hale kept one tape, a personal copy he had made on June 29 before leaving the ship. He stored it in a desk drawer at home. 2 weeks later, he decided to check it. He set up the player in his living room, loaded the tape, and pressed play. The opening minutes looked fine. The divers descended through dark water. Their lights cut small cones into the sea. Jennings' voice sounded clear. Lowell announced depth markers. Then the tape paused on its own. A line of thin static flickered across the middle. Hale tapped the side of the player. The static vanished. The frame advanced. But the divers were no longer in view. The screen showed the seafloor. No movement, no suits. The object lay in the background, but something had changed in its appearance. Hale leaned closer. The curved line across its surface glowed faintly, as if the tape had captured a light not visible in person. He rewound 10 seconds. The divers reappeared. He advanced again. The seafloor returned. He watched this several times. The tape showed 2 different realities in the same span. The next morning, Hale brought the tape to Evans. When she tried to play it, the screen stayed black. She checked all the wires. She changed players. She cleaned the tape. Nothing worked. Evans finally opened the cassette to examine the reel. The tape inside was blank. The magnetic coating had faded to a dull grey. It looked old, as if it had not been sealed 3 months earlier, but decades. Hale wrote one final entry that afternoon. It was filed privately, not through official channels. The entry read, "The recordings are not breaking. They are being emptied." 5 days later, a courier arrived, with an order instructing Hale to cease all review, discussion, and analysis of the Emden Trench incident. The order carried no signature, only a stamp marked Directive 47B. Evans left the Navy the following year. She later told a colleague she had seen one tape behave in a way that should not be possible. She refused to give details. No functioning recording of the dive remains in any known archive. The signal that kept returning. The first report came from a civilian research vessel, the Marina Solis, on the 4th of February 1988, almost 8 months after the Navy dive team left the Emden Trench. The ship was charting plankton blooms for a Manila-based ocean study when its sonar operator, Daniel Cruz, noticed a single pulse strike the receiver. The pulse was low, steady, and spaced at an exact interval of 93 seconds. Cruz logged it without alarm. At the time, he assumed it was from a distant cargo ship, but the vessel's radar showed no ships within 100 kilometers. Cruz marked the position of the signal and wrote a simple line in the ship's notebook. Pulse from depth, not mechanical. At 15:22 p.m., the second pulse struck the sonar. At 15:24, the third, each pulse was identical, in length 0.7 seconds. They came from the same direction, fixed, unwavering. Cruz called the bridge and asked for a heading check. Everything appeared normal. There was no sign of any underwater activity. When the Marina Solis returned to port, Cruz submitted the Anomaly to the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources. The report sat unanswered for weeks. It was filed as non-critical. No follow-up occurred. On March 12, the same pulse was detected again, this time by the Japanese oceanography vessel Keiryo Maru. The ship recorded 5 pulses over 11 minutes while taking seabed temperature readings. Their instruments marked the origin at a depth close to 3,000 meters. The pulse was precise. It did not drift with the current, it did not weaken. The ship's science officer, Dr. Ayako Mura, described it as closer to a metronome than a natural event. She compared the frequency with existing marine signals. It did not match whale songs, submarine communication, seismic tremors, or any known biological source. When she reported the readings to the Japan Agency for Marine Earth Science, they replied with a short note asking for confirmation of the coordinates. The coordinates matched exactly with those logged by Cruz on the Marina Solis. Both signals came from the rim of the Emden Trench. Both came from the region where the divers from the USS Harper's Run had found the object. On April 1, a buoy operated by NOAA registered the same pulse. Its automated system recorded 3 hits, separated by 93 seconds. The files were flagged for review, but the technician in charge dismissed them as instrument sensitivity errors. He noted that the buoy had malfunctioned earlier in the year. Yet the buoy malfunction did not explain why the interval between the pulses was exact to the millisecond. By late April, 4 fishing vessels, 2 research ships, and 1 cargo carrier reported the same pulse. None of them knew about the others. None of them communicated with naval authorities. Yet each described the sound similarly, a soft, heavy push in the sonar, like something tapping the receiver from beneath the hull. The Philippine Institute for Marine Studies compiled the first independent map of the signals on May 8. The pulses always came from the same fixed point. The depth reading 2,940 meters was consistent with the dive logs from 1,987. The Institute sent their report to the Pacific Underwater Survey Office, noting that the signal did not behave like an echo, it behaved like a broadcast. On May 21, the signal changed. A Norwegian vessel, the Stjernavik, recorded a double pulse 2 strikes spaced 0, 4 seconds apart, followed by the usual 93-second gap. The double pulse repeated 8 times, then stopped. The operator, Leif Mikkelsen, replayed the recording several times. The double pulse did not distort, it did not fade, he wrote in his report, almost like a word added to a pattern. When the Stjernavik forwarded its logs to maritime authorities, they received an unexpected reply. A U.S. Naval liaison asked for all original recordings, hardware specifications, and sonar coil settings. Mikkelsen found the request unusual. The Stjernavik had no reason to coordinate with US naval units. Their captain complied anyway, assuming it was a shared scientific exchange. He received no further communication. In June, satellite-linked hydrophones deployed near Taiwan detected the pulse faintly, though the depth and distance should have made it impossible. The hydrophones were not built to capture signals from the Philippine Sea, yet each time the pulse struck, the sensors registered a slight vibration, a signature that matched the earlier NOAA buoy readings. This expansion puzzled the researchers. A signal spreading outward, without losing strength or changing shape, indicated a stable and deliberate source. Something near the trench was emitting the pulse, and it had continued to do so for months. On July 2, the pulse increased in strength for the first time. The Kairyo Maru detected it while passing 120 kilometers from its previous location. The sonar operator, Hiro Ito, noted that the pulse caused a slight tremor in the receiver. He compared it with earlier recordings and found the new pulse was stronger by 12%, Ito said. It's as if the source is rising or adjusting its position. His captain ordered deeper scans. The undersea terrain near the trench edge showed no change, no new rock formations, no thermal vents, nothing that would explain a consistent, rising signal. Ito submitted his data to Japan's Marine Agency. Within 2 days, he was instructed to stop tracking the pulse. The message carried no explanation. On July 19, the last civilian recording occurred aboard the Marina Solis, the same vessel that first detected the anomaly. Crews heard the pulse return as the ship passed near the Emden Trench. But something was different. The interval was no longer 93 seconds. It was 62. The pulse had shortened. The rhythm had changed. He checked his equipment again. The reading was correct. Crews called the bridge. Before the captain responded, a second pulse struck louder than any previous record. The sound printed sharply on the sonar screen. The third pulse came faster, then a fourth. The water beneath them vibrated enough to shake loose a metal cup from the operator's console. Crews pressed record. The system captured the first 3 pulses. The fourth caused the display to freeze. The fifth did not appear at all. When he reviewed the file afterward, the first 2 pulses remained intact. The third was faint. The fourth had vanished completely. The fifth left no signature. The Marina Solis left the area immediately. 2 weeks later, the Pacific Underwater Survey Office issued a notice stating that all anomalous sonar signals in the region have been reviewed and determined to be non-hazardous. No further information was provided. The pulse continued, heard by no official instruments, logged by no public research teams, and acknowledged by no agency. But crews kept a private journal entry dated August 14. It reads, "I heard it again tonight through the hull. Not sonar, just sound. One long pulse, like something calling out. He never sailed near the trench again." The map the Navy never released. The first version of the seafloor chart was drafted on the 22nd of August 1988, inside a windowless room at Pearl Harbor. It was a routine update, part of the Navy's periodic mapping of the Philippine Sea floor. The hydrographic team expected to see the same contours recorded the year before: a smooth shelf, a gentle slope, and then the sudden drop into the Emden Trench. Instead, they found a slight rise in the sediment near the trench's upper ledge. The elevation was not large, just 43 centimeters, but it did not belong there. The sea floor at that depth did not shift upward without cause. Technician Henry Collins was the first to notice it. He compared the new scan with the charts from May 1988. 1987. Then he checked the logs from January 1988, which showed no change. The rise appeared in only the most recent sweep. Collins recalibrated the system twice. The numbers stayed the same. When he laid the maps side by side, the raised area formed a faint arc. It curved around a region exactly 41 meters across. That measurement matched the width of the object the divers had found the year before. Collins wrote a short note in the margin. Elevation ring consistent with subsurface mass. Should not be possible without displacement. He brought the maps to Lieutenant Hale, who had returned to Pearl Harbor months earlier. Hale said nothing for a long moment as he studied the lines. The arc was subtle, so subtle it looked like a printing error, but the numbers did not lie. The seafloor had changed shape. On September 5, the Navy conducted a second mapping sweep using a different vessel, the USNS Meridian. The resulting map showed the same curve, but now a second arc appeared beneath it, forming a shallow oval. The hydrographic team described it as a shadow shape created by differences in sediment density. The oval measured 41 meters by 18 meters. It matched the sonar outline recorded by the divers almost exactly. No earthquakes had struck the region that month, no landslides, no volcanic activity. Yet each new survey revealed clearer contours, as if the object beneath the sediment were becoming more visible with time. Chief Surveyor Daniel Wright compared the layering to an image surfacing in a darkroom tray, slowly sharpening, grain by grain. At a meeting on September 18, Wright presented the newest map to senior officers. The room remained silent until someone asked if the object might be rising. Wright answered calmly, "If it is rising without movement. These readings show no shift in position, only changes in sediment height and density." He paused before adding, "It's as if the seafloor is adjusting around it." A request for deep scan sonar was submitted on September 22. The request was denied within hours. The denial came with a coded message requiring all future mapping to be classified under Directive 47B, the same directive that halted Hale's recording review. The team was instructed to continue mapping, but avoid marking the coordinates on any publicly accessible documents. By October, the maps showed more detail. The oval shape was no longer a faint shadow. Its edges stood out clearly, forming a smooth boundary. A thin ridge had developed along the southern border, just a few centimeters high, but perfectly even. Wright circled it on the chart. He noted that no natural formation produced such symmetry at that depth. On October 28, the USNS Meridian performed a slow pass across the trench rim using low-frequency sonar. The return image displayed a large, smooth surface beneath the sediment, partially exposed on one side. The shape bore no texture of rock, coral, or hardened sediment. It reflected sound too cleanly. Wright replayed the scan several times. Each time, the outline grew sharper as the computer processed the image. On the final pass, the computer rendered a crude image, a flattened oval with a curved marking across the top. Hale recognized it instantly. It matched the line Andrea Lowell had seen and traced with her light on the dive. Wright asked Hale if the marking meant anything. Hale answered quietly, "It wasn't carved, it pushed outward." On November 10, another anomaly appeared. The map showed a thin, dark line near the lower edge of the oval. Its width measured 9 centimeters, the same width as the slit Lowell had observed before it opened and closed. This faint line had not appeared on any previous surveys. Collins checked the old maps. There was no trace of it. The slit had become visible through the sediment. Wright submitted a formal inquiry asking whether any equipment had been lowered into the trench without his knowledge. He received no reply. Instead, a sealed message arrived, ordering all hydrographic maps to be moved to a classified storage unit. The message ended with a single line, "Cease all independent analysis." But Wright had one final update to document. On November 22, the mapping vessel recorded a subtle displacement, a shift in the sediment height, measuring 6 centimeters downward, not upward, as before, downward. The measurement was consistent along the entire arc, forming a long depression around the object. Wright wrote that the seafloor looked as if something beneath had settled or exhaled. When he overlaid the November map with the first scan from August, the change became unmistakable. The object had not moved, but the sediment around it had reshaped itself, repeatedly rising, forming ridges, revealing outlines, exposing the slit. He showed the comparison to Hale in private. The difference between the two charts looked almost deliberate, as though the object beneath the trench were drawing itself clearer with each passing month. Hale whispered the only explanation that fit the pattern. It wasn't just sitting there, it was doing something. The final chart, the one the Navy never released, remained locked in a drawer beneath Directive 47B. On it, written in Collins' calm handwriting, was the last note added before the team was disbanded. Subsurface structure, now fully outlined. Origin, unknown. Behaviour continues. The drawer was sealed, the maps vanished. The trench remained quiet, but the shape in the sediment kept its place, its outline clearer than ever. The diver who wouldn't speak. Andrea Lowell left active duty on the 4th of March 1989. Her file listed the reason as medical separation, non-combat, non-critical. The language was standard, but her commanding officer later admitted in a private note that he had never seen a separation approved so quickly. Lowell had passed every physical exam during her years of service. She had no disciplinary issues, no injuries, no recorded mental health concerns. Yet 3 months after the Navy began mapping changes around the Emden Trench, she was quietly moved out of operations and placed on restricted duty. Her first medical evaluation took place on the 6th of December 1988. The notes from that appointment were brief. Lowell reported episodes of pressure behind the ears and short pulses of dizziness, always occurring at night. The physician, Lieutenant Harrell, ordered standard inner ear tests. The results showed nothing unusual. He recommended rest and hydration. Lowell returned to duty. 2 weeks later, she came back. This time, she described a different symptom. She said she occasionally heard a faint vibration when the room was silent. She explained it calmly, without emotion. Harrell wrote that her tone was steady, controlled, not distressed. She compared the sound to the moment her suit recorded a vibration near the slit on the object. She said the sound lasted no more than a second, but had begun repeating every few days. Harrell recommended neurological testing. The request was approved within the hour. On the 4th of January 1989, Lowell underwent a full scan at Tripler Army Medical Center. The technicians found no abnormalities. Her hearing test returned perfect scores. Her balance tests showed no weakness. Her blood work was normal. Yet she reported another vibration during the exam. The technician standing beside her heard nothing. The room's instruments detected nothing. The vibration did not register on any device. When Harrell asked her to describe it again, she paused for several seconds before answering. She said, "It's not like sound, it's like something passing through me." Harrell wrote the comment in quotation marks. After the exam, Lowell's access to trench-related material was suspended. She was removed from deep water assignments. No explanation was provided in her file, but a memo placed under Directive 47B stated, "Subject to observation until further notice." It did not specify the type of observation. On January 29, Lowell visited Harrell's office without an appointment. She looked calm, but her voice was quieter than usual. She said she no longer heard the vibration, but she had begun dreaming about the dive. She described the dream clearly. She stood on the seafloor. The object lay in front of her. Its surface emitted a soft light. The curved line across the top pulsed once like a slow heartbeat. Then she woke. Harrell asked whether she had experienced anxiety or stress. She said no. She said the dream did not frighten her. It simply felt exact, as though it were replaying something that had never happened during the real dive. She insisted she was not imagining it. Harrell recommended follow-up evaluations. She agreed, but she never showed up for the next appointment. On February 11, the Navy arranged a formal psychological assessment. Lowell answered every question with sharp clarity. She denied stress, denied fear, denied sleep issues. She said the vibration had faded entirely. She said she felt fine. Her evaluator, Commander Ray Sandoval, wrote that she appeared lucid, stable, and focused. But at the bottom of the page, Sandoval wrote one more line: unusual lack of emotional response when discussing deep-sea exposure event. 2 days later, Lowell submitted a request for voluntary separation from the Navy. This request would normally take months to process. Hers was approved the next morning. Harrell was not notified. Neither was Sandoval. Lowell was told to pack her things and report to a clearance briefing. At the briefing, an officer she had never met handed her a document explaining that she was not to discuss any details of the Emden Trench dive, verbally, written, or in personal correspondence. She signed without objection. The officer asked if she had anything to report before leaving service. She looked at him for several seconds, then said no. She moved to Washington State a week later. Hale visited her in March after hearing about her discharge. He found her living in a small apartment near Bremerton. She welcomed him inside, offered tea, and spoke politely. But when he asked about her symptoms, she simply shook her head. She said she did not hear anything anymore. She said she did not dream about the trench. She said she barely remembered the dive at all. Hale did not believe her. He asked again. This time, she paused. She looked toward the window, as though expecting something outside. Then she said, "It was only loud when we were down there, the round frumps." Hale asked what she meant. She answered, "You didn't hear it. None of you did." When he pressed her, she grew quiet. She placed her hands flat on the table and said she was tired. She asked him not to return. Hale left without another question. 2 months later, on June 9, she contacted Harold by phone. She said she needed to report something. Her voice sounded steady, but before she could explain, the line cut out. Harold attempted to call back. Her phone had been disconnected. Lowell did not answer letters. She did not respond to official requests. Her file remained open for 6 months, then was closed without further comment. Only one final note exists about her. It was written by a civilian neighbor on a rental form. The neighbor described her as quiet, polite, kept to herself. But under additional remarks, the neighbor added a single sentence. She said she didn't like the sound of the ocean anymore. It was the only time she ever spoke of the sea again. The night the trench went dark, the blackout began at 2:11 a.m. on the 3rd of September 1989. Nothing on the surface indicated trouble. The Philippine Sea lay still under a clear sky. The wind measured at only 3 knots. No storms appeared on any forecast. Yet at that exact minute, 14 separate deep-sea instruments stationed near the Emden Trench stopped transmitting. Not gradually, not with static, they simply vanished from the grid. The first loss came from hydrophone station E14, a buoy anchored at the trench's northern edge. Operator Vincent Ong saw its signal drop to 0. He logged the failure and sent a maintenance request. 30 seconds later, the second station E9 went dark. Ong assumed the electrical system had faulted, but when he checked the satellite feed, the error did not match a power loss. It looked more like the hydrophones had been disconnected from the sea itself. At 2:13, NOAA's satellite sensors stopped receiving thermal readings from the area. The sea surface temperature around the trench flattened to an impossible uniform value, 3.2 degrees Celsius. It did not drift, did not pulse, did not change with waves. It held the number like a locked screen. Technician Margot Hill stared at the flatline and wrote in her log, "No body of water on Earth maintains a perfect constant temperature for more than a second," she called her supervisor. Before he reached her station, the feed cut to black. By 2:15, every current tracker in a 30-kilometer radius had stopped sending data. The trackers did not go offline. They sent empty readings. They behaved as if the ocean around them had ceased moving entirely. No drift, no turbulence, no vibration. The instruments stood in silence. On a small research platform near Basco, marine physicist Dr. Alan Reyes rose from bed after the current alarm sounded. He checked the monitors in person. The water appeared calm, but the instruments measured something unusual. No salinity changes at all. The boundary between deeper and shallower water disappeared. Reyes recorded the reading, "Complete leveling of salinity gradient." He later told a colleague that the sea looked held still, though the surface moved gently like always. At 2:17, the blackout reached the furthest sensor, a Japanese deep ocean seismograph anchored 12 kilometers from the trench. Its operator, Kaito Nijima, watched the seismograph's needle freeze mid-stroke before stopping entirely. It did not flatline, it simply halted. Nijima attempted to restart the device, but each reboot brought the same result. A blank grid, no motion, no noise, no registration. Then, for 6 minutes, the Emden Trench disappeared from all monitoring systems. The ocean remained dark in the sensor's eyes. Reyes later described the period as like a blind spot spreading across the sea. At 2:18, Ong checked the hydrophones again. The readings still showed nothing. He switched manually to live audio. The speakers emitted only a quiet hum, steady, smooth, almost soft. He lowered the volume, expecting interference, but the hum did not change. It did not waver. It remained a perfect tone near the edge of hearing. The tone lasted 27 seconds, then ended abruptly. At the exact second the tone stopped, Noah's thermal feed flashed back to life. The sea surface temperature jumped from the impossible 3.2 degrees Celsius to 9.8 degrees Celsius. In one instant, a rise far too fast to be natural. It stabilized a moment later at 8.1 degrees Celsius, matching the expected level for that month. 30 milliseconds after that adjustment, the current trackers resumed data transmission. They showed a sudden surge in the water column downward, not sideways. The surge lasted 7 seconds. Reyes, standing on the Basco platform, watched the readout spike. The water moved vertically, as if something beneath had pushed it down or drawn it inward. He wrote, "Not a wave, a sink." The platform shook just once, enough to rattle the metal frame, then stilled. At 2:23, the hydrophones returned one by one. Their readings showed normal conditions, but a full minute of their logs remained missing. Ong checked the timestamps. The gap was identical on every device: 2 hours, 16 minutes and 14 seconds to 2 hours, 17 minutes and 14 seconds. Exactly 60 seconds erased. By 2:24, all equipment was functioning normally again, all but one. Hydrophone station E9, the second device lost, returned with a damaged audio file. Ong opened the file. It contained a single sound recorded at the height of the blackout, a soft, distant thud. Not mechanical, not seismic, more like something heavy settling deep in the water. The sound lasted only half a second. The hydrophone picked up nothing before or after. Ong replayed the sound for Reyes a week later. Reyes listened twice. Then he said, "It sounds like weight returning to rest." But the blackout left one more anomaly. At 8:10 that same morning, the Cairo Maru received a strange data burst while decoding their scheduled overnight transmission from the seismograph network. It was a fragment of a depth reading. The number repeated 3 times before the file ended. 3,128.4 meters. That depth was 188 meters deeper than where the Navy had recorded the object resting. Dr. Mura, the ship's science officer, showed the file to her captain. The captain told her the transmission was corrupted and to discard it. Mura saved a private copy anyway. When she tried to run the file again that evening, her computer crashed. The file disappeared. 3 separate agencies later issued explanations for the blackout equipment fault: satellite desynchronization, electromagnetic disturbance from a passing storm. No storms were recorded that night. No solar activity occurred. No seismic activity was detected anywhere within 1,000 kilometers. And yet, all instruments failed together. All data vanished for the same minute. All readings returned simultaneously, as though switched back on. The official reports ended the same way. No further action required. But Reyes added a private note that he never submitted. It was found years later in a file marked with the wrong date. He wrote, "The sea was quiet during the blackout. Too quiet, as if something below it wanted silence." The return of the compass drift. The first modern report came from a fishing boat, the San Isidro II, on the 9th of April 1990. Captain Ernesto Dalapan noted that his compass needle leaned 5 degrees east while his vessel drifted west. He tapped the glass. The needle shook, steadied, then drifted again, always toward the Emden Trench. He switched to his backup compass. It did the same. Dalapan brought the vessel to a full stop. The water was calm, the sky steady, yet the needle continued its slow pull, moving as though under the influence of a magnetic field that did not exist on any chart. Dalapan returned to Basco and reported the fault to the harbour office. The technician on duty dismissed it as salt corrosion. Dalapan replaced both compasses with new ones from Manila. 3 days later, on the same route, both drifted again. The phenomenon revived an old memory for Lieutenant Mark Hale, who still followed trench-related reports even after being reassigned. He recognized the pattern immediately. During the 1987 dive, diver Russ Jennings had mentioned a brief compass drift near the object. The drift lasted only a few seconds. No one else's compass reacted. At the time, the anomaly was written off as equipment interference. But now, years later, civilian vessels with no connection to the Navy were reporting the same deviation. On May 18, a Taiwanese cargo ship, the Hai Shin 04, sent a distress call after its navigation system malfunctioned. The first officer stated the ship's autopilot attempted to correct for a turn the crew had not initiated. Manual controls restored order, but the navigation monitor showed the vessel drifting 4 degrees off course. The recorded heading did not match the visual horizon. The captain logged the incident, writing, "Compass behaving as if attracted to a point below waterline." The Philippine Coast Guard investigated. Their report concluded that the compass deviation was environmental, though they did not define which environmental factor could pull a steel vessel several degrees off heading without visible current. On June 2, more vessels reported the same pull fishing boats from Itbayat, a Japanese trawler, a private yacht from Guam. In every case, the needle leaned toward the same fixed bearing, 212 degrees southwest, directly toward the trench rim where the object lay buried. The coordinates matched almost exactly with the Navy's restricted maps from 1988. By late June, the anomaly was no longer intermittent. Ships reported the drift consistently within a 25-kilometer radius. The deviation grew stronger as vessels approached the trench. Some captains described the pull as a soft tug that encouraged the bow to veer. Others said the needle twitched like a living thing. The effect was too controlled to be random. Hale, now working at a coastal monitoring facility on Oahu, submitted a request for updated magnetic surveys of the area. The request was denied under Directive 47B, the same directive that had suppressed nearly every trench-related inquiry since 1987. But civilian researchers did not fall under that directive. On July 14, oceanographer Dr. Marisa Tendo led an independent survey using non-military funds. She brought a small team aboard her vessel, the Horizon Blue. Her compasses behaved normally until they reached within 19 kilometers of the trench. Then the needle drifted 1 degree, 2 degrees, then 5. Her digital compass registered a slight eastward pull, even though the sea was flat and the wind mild. The GPS showed no lateral movement, yet the bow of the vessel crept toward the southwest. Tendo anchored the ship. The anchor rope stretched tight, not from current, but from a downward pull almost beneath the hull. Her accelerometers detected no motion. Her current meters registered no flow. Tendo recorded one sentence in her research log: "The pull is directional without being physical." Her team lowered a magnetometer to a depth of 1,200 meters. The device returned a stable reading for 7 minutes, then began to drift. The recorded value fluctuated without pattern, sliding between strength levels that made no geological sense. When Tendo pulled the magnetometer back, a thin grey dust coated its casing. She scraped a sample into a vial. Under magnification, the dust was not metallic. It was sediment fine, uniform, and identical to samples gathered from the trench floor during earlier surveys. The dust should not have been present at that depth or on that equipment. On July 27, a commercial cruise ship passing 50 kilometers northeast of the trench reported a brief but measurable disturbance. The steering became sluggish for 15 seconds. The compass spun slowly clockwise, then stabilized. The captain recorded it as anomalous drift with no mechanical cause. 3 weeks later, in August, NOAA satellites detected a weak but steady magnetic irregularity above the trench. It was not strong enough to be classified as a field, but it was too organized to be noise. It pulsed faintly at long intervals, the same intervals used to describe the sonar signal recorded in 1988. By September, fishermen near Basco stopped using compasses entirely. They navigated by stars and shoreline memory. Some said the sea wanted to pull the needle toward the deep. Others refused to comment at all. Dr. Tendo submitted her findings to the Pacific Geomagnetic Institute. Her report was returned unread, with a message stating that the area she surveyed was under active review by an unnamed agency. She attempted to file a second report. It did not receive a response. Hale obtained a copy of Tendo's raw data from a colleague who worked with her. He compared her compass drifts with the original readings from Jennings's dive suit. The angle of deviation matched 2 degrees west, slight lateral pull, minor oscillation. The only difference was intensity. The drift recorded in 1990 was far stronger. Hale wrote in his personal notes, "If the object was inactive then, it is not inactive now." But the most alarming event occurred on October 11. A research submarine from a private Japanese foundation attempted to descend within 10 kilometers of the trench. At 900 meters, its compass spun a full rotation. At 1,200 meters, the lights dimmed. At 1,400 meters, the craft's depth gauge froze. The pilot immediately aborted the dive. When the submarine resurfaced, the main compass was still locked, pointing southwest toward the trench. The pilot reported a sensation like pressure folding inward during the descent. Though no mechanical strain appeared on the hull, the craft was removed from service for inspection. Nothing was found. In December, all official maritime advisories for the region were updated quietly. The new wording cautioned ships to expect magnetic disturbances near the Emden Trench. No explanation followed. No announcement was made. But fishermen near Basco said something simpler and more unsettling. The water knows where it wants the needle to point. That phrase spread across the villages. No one said it loudly, but everyone obeyed it. And the trench remained silent, the day the seafloor breathed. The event began on the 2nd of March 1991, though the first people to notice it did not understand what they were seeing. At 6:14 a.m., a Japanese ocean floor monitoring buoy, anchored near the Emden Trench, registered a sudden upward shift in its depth gauge, 1.9 meters. The buoy operator, Akira Nomoto, believed the gauge had jammed. He tapped the console twice. The reading did not change. He recalibrated the software, still unchanged. He took a manual measurement. The manual reading confirmed the shift. The seafloor had risen. Nomoto wrote, "No quake detected, no tremor, depth is wrong," and phoned his supervisor. But before anyone could respond, the depth returned to normal. The seafloor sank back smoothly, silently, without any measurable vibration. At 6:17, the buoy recorded a second rise. This one measured 1.2 meters. It lasted 12 seconds. Then the seafloor fell again, slow enough to look deliberate. Nomoto stared at the chart. The rise and fall formed a curve with no jagged spikes. Not a shock, not a fault slip. It resembled the changing of a tide, but from below. He added one more line to his notes. "Looks like breathing." At the same moment, 70 kilometers west, a Philippine Coast Guard vessel, the Bagong Lakbay, reported that the water beneath the hull felt lighter than usual. Ensign Raul Villarán wrote that the ship seemed to lift slightly, not by wave motion, but by buoyancy. The hull rose by several centimeters. The crew thought it was an illusion until the engine RPM dropped by 2% without any change in throttle. The propellers met less resistance in the water, as if the density had momentarily changed. When Villarán checked depth readings, he found that the seabed below them had shifted upward by nearly 2 meters, matching the buoy's readings. Minutes later, the seafloor returned to its original value. By 6:20, several research vessels, positioned far apart, detected the same vertical displacement. Their logs each recorded the rise with the same timing, the same height variance, and the same smooth curve. No seismic sensors in Japan, Taiwan, or the Philippines registered any quake activity. The Earth did not move, only the seafloor did. At 6:23, NOAA satellites captured a faint circular disturbance on the ocean surface, aligned perfectly above the trench rim. The circle did not rotate. It did not form outward waves. It simply appeared as a subtle brightening water pushed outward evenly, like a large, slow bubble rising from below. But no bubble surfaced. Instead, the water darkened briefly, then returned to normal. Analysts later said it resembled thermal uplift, though no thermal readings supported this. At 6:26, the depth rose again, 1.4 meters this time, but instead of sinking back, it held steady for 9 full seconds. Every buoy and vessel recorded the same pause. Then the sea floor sank lower than before by 0.6 meters. This downward shift was unprecedented. Nomoto checked the equipment multiple times. He wrote, "Seafloor settling deeper than baseline. No sediment drift detected." A settling of that size should have produced silt clouds or visible turbidity, yet all sediment remained still, as if the water around the trench were holding it in place. At 6:32, the largest rise occurred 2.1 meters. This time, the uplift was strong enough to affect surface currents. The Bagong Lakbay crew felt the ship tilt slightly. A fisherman near Itbayat later described the water around his boat as breathing out and breathing in, though he could give no clearer explanation. At 6:34, all sensors recorded something new. A faint vibration passed through the water column, not a quake, not a pulse, but a slow undulation that moved upward from the trench floor. One researcher compared it to pressure equalizing inside a vast chamber. It's so no, the vibration lasted 8 seconds. It produced no damage, no shake, no noise, but every depth meter froze for the duration of the vibration, then resumed reading normally as it ended. By 6:36, the seafloor stabilized. Depth values across all stations returned to baseline. The breathing effect stopped. Nomoto, shaken but steady, rewound the logs. Every rise followed the same pattern, controlled, smooth, perfectly consistent across the entire area. There was no tectonic signature, no upwelling from volcanic vents, no measurable temperature increase, no shift in salinity. The water chemistry was unchanged. The seafloor had moved as a single unit. At 7:10, an unmarked aircraft passed over the region. The Philippine Coast Guard logged it, but received no transponder signal. The aircraft circled twice and departed. At 8:04, the Pacific Underwater Survey Office issued a request for all raw data from the event. By dusk, civilian researchers found their access to the region's live feeds restricted. 3 buoy operators received updated firmware that locked their manual override functions. No explanation was given. NOAA released a preliminary public statement 2 weeks later. It attributed the unusual readings to instrument synchronization errors, but the archived files from that morning, saved by technicians before the restrictions began, show no errors. On March 8, Hale, still quietly collecting information, received an anonymous envelope. Inside were 5 depth charts from the event, all marked by hand. The final chart had a circle drawn around the deepest point. Next to it, someone had written, "It rose and fell without shifting. Nothing natural behaves like this." Hale stared at the message for a long time. He underlined the last sentence and filed the chart with his other trench notes. But one more detail emerged from the event, a detail almost overlooked. One buoy recorded a faint audio signature during the final uplift. The sound lasted less than a second. Engineers dismissed it as static, but when the file was cleaned and enhanced several years later, the signature revealed a rhythmic sequence, not random, not noise. 3 pulses, a pause, 1 pulse. The same pattern recorded near the object years earlier. The sea had breathed once, then it had spoken again. The man who knew the coordinates. The man's name was Arthur K. Donnell, though he preferred to sign his notes simply AKD. He had retired from the Navy in 1985, 2 years before the discovery at the Emden Trench, but he continued working part-time as a civilian analyst at the Naval Data Reconstruction Office in Pearl Harbor. His role was quiet and technical. He compared old chart records, cleaned corrupted sonar logs, and checked for repeating errors in satellite transmissions. Most of his work involved routine calibration issues. Nothing unusual reached his desk until 1991. On April 12 of that year, an envelope with no return address arrived at the Reconstruction Office. Inside were photocopies of depth logs from the March 2 event, the morning the seafloor rose and fell like breath. The packet included readings from Japanese, Philippine, and NOAA instruments, all marked with identical timestamps. The top page carried a short message typed on a manual typewriter. "You will understand the intervals." "It may." Donnell read the logs 3 times. He noticed something immediately. Each rise occurred at precise spacing, 174 seconds, then 302 seconds, then 216 seconds, then 368 seconds. The lengths seemed irregular until he calculated the differences between each pair. Those differences formed a repeating sequence he had seen only once before, buried in the early sonar anomalies assigned to him in 1988. Donnell pulled the old records from storage. The repeating intervals in the sonar pulses, first found by Daniel Cruz of the Marina Solis, followed the same separation pattern. The deep water pulse had been arriving at fixed points of 93 seconds, then altering, then doubling, then returning. But the differences between those pulses matched the pattern written across the seafloor movements years later. Donnell circled the numbers and wrote, "Not random, same origin." Over the next 2 weeks, he began charting every anomaly connected to the trench compass drifts, depth shifts, satellite flatlines, even Lowell's reported vibrations. He plotted them on a rolling timeline. The pattern emerged slowly but clearly. Every 204 to 208 days, something changed. Not always the same way, but always within that window. A signal, a drift, a rise, a blackout. Different symptoms, same timing. Donald brought the chart to his supervisor. The supervisor told him to stop, saying the trench data was classified under Directive 47B and should never have been in the reconstruction office to begin with. The logs were removed from his desk the next morning. Donald didn't argue. He simply started over at home. By June, he had filled 10 notebooks with diagrams. Some showed long sequences of numbers. Others displayed time-based arcs that spiraled inward. He believed the object resting in the sediment was not static, but following a cycle. He called it a deep-sea clock. In one notebook he wrote, "It behaves like something adjusting itself. Not rising, not moving, aligning." The coordinates he calculated matched every recorded compass drift point. Every vessel's needle pointed to the same spot, whether from 5 kilometers away or 50. When he combined all drift angles, they formed lines converging on one exact coordinate, 12°41'219.4, 0202.8 The coordinate sat on the northern rim of the Emden Trench. Donald checked the Navy's classified charts, which he had copied years earlier during his old work. The coordinate matched the oval-shaped outline mapped in 1988. The object sat directly beneath it. But he made another discovery. The rising and settling movements recorded on March 2 matched the angles of the compass drifts documented months earlier. The object had not merely breathed, it had shifted internally, altering the surrounding sediment, which in turn affected the magnetic distortions measured by ships. Donald wrote, "It changes shape from within." In August, he typed a 6-page report titled "Behavioral Pattern of Subsea Floor Mass at Emden Trench." He mailed it to 3 people, NOAA headquarters, a marine geophysics team in Tokyo, and Lieutenant Mark Hale. Hale received his copy 10 days later. Donald's cover note said only, "You saw it first, see it again." A week later, NOAA sent Donald a letter instructing him to stop contacting federal agencies regarding sensitive material. The Tokyo team never replied. Hale wrote back with a short note saying he would review the numbers but advised Donald not to share the coordinates with anyone else. Donald kept working anyway. By September 18, he had refined his data enough to propose a full cycle formula. He estimated the object exhibited a major event every 732 days, exactly twice the interval between seismic quiet periods in that region, though the trench itself showed no such patterns. He believed the next major event would occur in December 1992. His final notebook, Notebook 11, contains his most detailed calculation. He drew the trench rim as a circle, plotted the coordinate at its northern edge, then wrote a strange line beneath it. "It is waiting for alignment." Under that line, he added, "Not rising, not emerging, preparing." The notebook ends on page 72. The final entry reads, "The next interval begins in 437 days. It has always followed its own timing. It will again." Donald's wife later said he stopped working the day after writing that. She recalled seeing him sit quietly in his chair, looking out the window toward the sea, though their home sat nearly half a mile inland. He died in December 1992, 1 week before the date he had marked for the next event. His notebooks were collected by federal agents the following morning. Only Hale kept a photocopy of the coordinate page, the one with a simple circle drawn around the trench rim and a small, handwritten note. "Something down there knows where it is." The Navy never acknowledged Donnell's work. His name does not appear in any official document related to the Emden Trench. His coordinates were never added to any public map, but fishermen in Basco still avoid the exact bearing he identified. They say a compass won't point away from it, and they say the water feels heavier there, even on calm days. The document that disappeared from Archive Room 4. Archive Room 4 at the Pacific Underwater Survey Office was not large. It held 2 rows of grey metal cabinets, a temperature regulator that hummed softly, and a signing desk where every person entering the room logged their purpose. The room had no windows. Its door opened only with paired authentication, an electronic badge and a 7-digit code. Every entry and exit was recorded. Nothing left the archives without procedure. Yet on the 6th of May 1993, one document disappeared. The missing file was known internally as Report HY 478B. It contained a high-resolution sub-bottom scan of the Emden Trench anomaly, captured in late 1992, just weeks before the date Arthur Donnell predicted would mark the next major cycle. The scan had been classified restricted deep acoustic imaging, a label used rarely and only for materials thought to contain structural intelligence. Report HY478B arrived in Archive Room 4 at 15:12 on February 9, carried by technician Lena Arturo. She logged it in the signing book, placed it into Cabinet 2, Drawer 3, and closed the door. At 15:15, she left the room. The motion-sensitive camera showed only her entry, the placement of the file, and her departure. No one else entered the archive that day. At 9:46 on May 6, technician Arturo returned to retrieve the same document for a supervisor's review. Cabinet 2 opened normally. Drawer 3 slid out smoothly. The folder inside was empty. The classification cover remained. The label remained. The document was gone. Arturo froze. She checked the drawer again. She removed every folder from the cabinet. She opened all 7 drawers. Nothing. She checked the signing log. No entries since her own in February. She checked the digital access record. No one had entered the room between February 9 and that morning. She called the supervisor. He arrived within minutes, reviewed the logs, and repeated the search. When he lifted the empty classification cover, he noticed something strange. The inside of the cover felt warm, as if someone had held it moments earlier. But the room temperature was standard, and the cover should have matched it exactly. At 10:08, a small team arrived to inspect the room. They checked the security system. All sensors were functioning. They checked the digital locks. No override had occurred. They checked the door frame. No scratches, no marks, no forced entry. At 10:21, the supervisor ordered a playback of the motion-sensitive camera. The footage covered the past 90 days. It showed an empty room, no shadows, no motion, no entry. Only Arturo herself recorded on February 9, placing the file into the drawer. But at the timestamp 2 hours, 14 minutes and 33 seconds AM on April 27, something changed. For exactly one frame, 1/30 of a second, the camera feed cut to a blank grey screen. Not static, not distortion. Grey, uniform, featureless. Then the feed returned as if nothing had happened. The room was empty before the frame. The room was empty after. At no point did a person appear. The investigators reviewed the frame-by-frame footage 20 times. The blank frame was the only anomaly in the entire 90-day window. It lasted too long to be a compression artifact, yet too short to be a camera failure. Its colour was too even to be caused by dust or light reflection. It looked intentional. The investigators checked every file stored in the archive. Nothing else was missing. Only the document that contained the most complete scan of the object beneath the trench. The investigation concluded at 13:14 with a formal statement. Report HY478B removed from archive by unknown method. No evidence of unauthorized entry. No corrective action applicable. The statement was sealed under Directive 47B. But Arturo could not stop thinking about the warm folder cover. She returned to the archive the next morning. The room was quiet. The cabinets looked ordinary. Yet when she stepped toward Cabinet 2, her skin prickled. She hesitated before opening the drawer. Inside, the empty classification cover sat exactly where she had left it. But now the cover was cold, colder than the room. Arturo reported the temperature discrepancy to her supervisor, who dismissed it as environmental variation. She did not agree. The temperature regulator in room 4 maintained everything within 1/10 of a degree. A cold surface meant one thing. The folder had changed temperature between the moment she last touched it and that morning. The cover should not have cooled. 2 days later, at 2:13 AM, a second blank frame appeared in the archive camera. Same duration, same colour, same silence. Investigators checked the room immediately after. Nothing had changed. No file had moved. But the timestamp on the blank frame, 2 hours, 13 minutes and 18 seconds, matched precisely with the minute of the blackout near the trench 2 years earlier. When the logs were reviewed, one more detail emerged. During that exact second, every humidity and pressure sensor in room 4 flicked downward by the same small amount, like a soft vacuum settling over the space for a fraction of a moment. The environmental logs described it as a dip. No explanation was added. Late in 1993, Arturo resigned. She moved back to her hometown in Quezon province and rarely spoke of her work again. But in her final exit interview, she said one sentence that entered the personnel record. "I don't believe someone removed that file. I believe something reached for it." She provided no further comment. Report HY478B was never recovered. No backup existed. The Navy denied its existence. But Hale, who kept careful track of every anomaly, noted the timestamp of the archived blank frame and wrote a short line beside it. Same second, same pattern, same silence. The structure under the sediment. The last confirmed scan of the object, completed just weeks before report HY478B vanished, showed details no one had expected. It was a deep acoustic composite assembled from 6 overlapping passes by the USNS Meridian in late 1992, stitched together by analysts who believed they were mapping nothing more than a compacted mass in the trench wall. The first 2 passes showed what the Navy already knew: a smooth, oval outline lying at an angle, 41 meters across and partially submerged under fine sediment. But the third pass, the one conducted at an oblique angle to the trench rim, revealed something the earlier dives could not. The object was not a monolithic shape. It contained layers. The scan displayed internal bands, 7 of them, each with different density signatures. Some bands were thin, some several meters thick, but all curved inward at the exact same radius. None followed the grain or compression pattern of natural rock. Instead, the layers alternated between high-density and low-density zones, creating a ripple effect inside the mass. The clean, repeating geometry suggested structure, not accident. Chief Surveyor Daniel Wright included a quiet note in the margins of his draft report. He wrote, "No geological process produces alternating density rings of constant curvature. Beneath that," he added, "resembles engineered strata." The phrasing was unusual enough that his supervisor crossed the second line out before any higher review, but the original remained in Wright's personal copy. When the 4th acoustic pass ran, the imaging unit detected a hollow region in the lower quadrant, an internal pocket, 5 meters wide. The pocket reflected sound differently from everything around it. The echo returned, soft, muted, almost absorbed. The technicians ran the pass again, thinking it a sensor error. The pocket remained. The 5th pass revealed something stranger. The curved line visible on the outer surface, first described by diver Lowell during the 1987 dive, had an internal counterpart. Beneath the outer arc sat a second arc, thinner and sharper, aligned perfectly beneath the first. They were separated by less than a meter of material. The 2 arcs mirrored one another, as though they were parts of a single structure folded in on itself. Analysis indicated the arcs were not cracks or faults. They were boundaries. The internal arc reflected acoustic pulses too cleanly to be natural. Wright tested the reflection pattern against known alloys and composites. None matched. The closest resemblance came not from geology, but from experimental hull materials used in deep pressure testing, constructed layering, intended to distribute stress across a surface. No one dared write the comparison officially, but in a private note hidden in Wright's handwriting between 2 pages, the phrase appeared: layered reinforcement. On the 6th and final pass, the imaging team increased power. The return image sharpened. For the first time, the object's internal arrangement came into focus, not fully, not cleanly, but enough to see a shape that had not been obvious from the outside. The layers converged toward the hollow pocket. The arcs pointed toward it. The density gradients all leaned inward, feeding into the same central region. Everything inside the object seemed arranged around that empty space. Wright stared at the scan for several minutes without speaking. When he finally wrote something down, it was only 3 words. "It has symmetry." The scan also revealed something subtle but unsettling. The hollow pocket had shifted slightly since the Navy's earliest readings, only by centimeters, but enough to measure. Something inside was not fixed. It had changed position. The technician reviewing the shift made a joke, he said. It looked like the center moved. No one else laughed. Hale, who had been observing the session in silence, leaned forward and asked them to run the comparison again. The shift remained visible. Wright whispered, without looking up, "Nothing buried under 3 kilometers of water moves like that." 2 days later, the report was placed into the folder labeled HY478B. 7 weeks after that, the folder was found empty. Only one copy of the deepest layer analysis survived an early draft write, kept hidden in a notebook. Hale later obtained the draft under the table. It carried one final annotation, written in extremely small lettering at the bottom corner, as though Wright did not want it easily seen. The annotation read, "The structure is not inert." Below it, in lighter pencil, almost erased, orientation changing, preparing alignment. When Hale studied the draft years later, he tried to understand what the layers implied, the alternating densities, the perfect curves, the mirrored arcs above and below the surface, the shifting pocket in the center. He traced the curved arcs with his finger and realized something unsettling. The lines resembled not a shell or casing, but the ribs of a chamber. He pressed the page flat. The geometry formed something unmistakable, a protective housing surrounding an internal cavity. Whatever lay under the Emden Trench was not a simple mass. It was not sedimentary. It was not volcanic. It was not a submerged craft, at least not in any conventional sense. It was a layered, organized structure with parts arranged around a core that had moved over time. And the layers, all 7 of them, were angled in one specific direction. Toward the slit Lowell saw open and close, the only point of contact between the structure and the outside world, the place where the pressure changed, the place where the pulses began. Hale placed the draft back into its envelope and wrote one final line in his notes, the last line he would ever add to the Emden Trench file. "We were not mapping a thing, we were mapping a condition." He never explained what he meant. The Navy shut down all remaining surveys. All coordinates were locked behind 47B. Civilian vessels were warned away from the region. And the fishermen near Basco continued to say the same quiet sentence, the one passed between them for years. The deep is changing its shape. They do not go near the trench anymore. And for a long time, nothing else rose from beneath it. For a long time, it waited, and the sea above remained still. The Emden Trench remained sealed beneath 3 kilometers of water, its structure unchanged but never still. The reports vanished, the recordings erased themselves. The cycles continued behind layers of silence the ocean does not normally keep. Whatever rests beneath that sediment has not surfaced, but nothing in the data suggests it sleeps. If you want the next chapter of this investigation, if you want us to continue following the patterns no one is allowed to explain, then stay with us, like the video, share it, and subscribe so you never miss what the deep leaves behind next.